There's a very specific feeling you get when you've been out on the water during a terrible storm,
Oh, yeah. Pure exhaustion.
right? The boat is pitching back and forth. The wind is just howling in your ears. The rain is stinging your face. You're exhausted from, well, just trying to hold on.
Just surviving it.
Yeah. And then finally you pull into a quiet harbor. You drop the anchor. You hear that heavy splash. The chain rattles down into the dark. And suddenly the water is calm.
It's a total shift.
It really is. The storm is still raging out there on the ocean. You can hear it roaring in the distance. But right here, in this little pocket of water, you're safe. You can finally stop bracing for the next wave, let go of the rigging, and just breathe.
That is such a vivid picture.
It is, and welcome to Reformed Thinking. Today we are taking a very close look at a striking piece of source material that opens with that very image. A sailor finding a safe harbor.
Yeah, we are unpacking a message delivered by Charles Spurgeon. It's called Good News for the Age, preached in 1855.
And it builds entirely on a single line from the parable of the workers in the vineyard in the Gospel of Matthew. Our mission for this deep dive today is to see how this specific message completely upends the common assumptions you might hold about, well, how you earn your standing, the timing of your life, and the nature of grace.
That harbor imagery is such a fitting way to begin, especially when we look at the historical context here. It was December 30th, 1855, a freezing Sunday in London.
Oh, wow. Right at the finish line.
Right, the year is literally dying. And Spurgeon uses the turning of the calendar, that very natural transition from the old year to the new, to prompt a very serious, unflinching look at where the listener actually stands before their creator.
Because the end of the year is always a time when we take stock, right? When we review our choices.
Yeah, and here it is utilized to force a confrontation with realities we often try to ignore. The tension established right away is whether the listener is actually safe in that harbor or if they are still out in the storm, just pretending the boat isn't sinking.
Putting on a brave face.
Yeah. The question he is asking his audience is very pointed. As the year closes, have you found an anchor? Or are you just drifting into another year of the same old rebellion?
Well, let's start with the central story this whole thing is built on, because it sets the stage for everything that follows.
The parable in Matthew.
Right. It's a parable about a householder, a master, who owns a vineyard and needs workers. Before we even talk about when these people are hired, Spurgeon draws our attention to who is doing the calling and how these workers are found in the first place.
This is a crucial detail.
It is. So the master goes out into the marketplace early in the morning, and the detail highlighted here is that he finds people standing idle. They were doing nothing.
Literally just standing around.
Yeah. Spurgeon leans on this heavily to illustrate the concept of divine sovereignty. He brings up the picture of an absolute monarch or a potter who has complete authority over the clay vessels he shapes on his wheel.
The phrase standing idle completely shatters human ideas of merit. I mean, think about how we view hiring today.
Oh, it's all about the hustle.
Right. When we think of someone getting a job, we picture a person polishing their resume, actively checking job boards, networking, practicing their interview answers.
We assume the person getting hired has demonstrated some sort of initiative, right?
Yes. Some superior skill, or at least a strong desire to work. We love the idea of the self-starter, but Spurgeon aggressively pushes back against that framework when it comes to standing before God.
Because these workers weren't doing any of that.
None of it. They were not seeking employment. They were completely inactive in the marketplace. Salvation, in this framework, begins entirely with the householder's initiative, not the laborer's resume.
The master approaches them.
He makes the offer. The laborers contribute absolutely nothing to the initiation of this relationship. It is a unilateral move of grace.
Okay, I have to stop you there, though, because I can hear people listening to this and immediately throwing their hands up.
Oh, for sure. It's abrasive to our ears.
Doesn't this concept of an absolute monarch sound a bit harsh or maybe even tyrannical to modern ears? I mean, we live in democracies. We hate the idea of unchecked absolute authority.
We bristle at it immediately.
Right. It feels like a corporate CEO walking out into a city square and just randomly handing out high-paying executive jobs to people who didn't even apply.
While completely bypassing people who might have been trying really hard.
Yes. Our modern sensibilities crave fairness. We want a system where if you put in the effort, you get the reward. If you study hard, you get the grade. This concept feels like it completely bypasses the human element of trying, and honestly, it feels a little unfair.
It does bypass the human element of trying, and what's fascinating is Spurgeon addresses that discomfort head on. The core argument here is that humanity has zero claims on the Creator.
We act like we do, though.
We do. We operate under this baseline assumption that God owes us a fair shake, that we start at neutral, and if we do pretty well, we deserve a reward.
Like we're owed something.
Right. But the argument made here is that if a person receives pure, unadulterated justice, they perish. They receive the penalty for their rebellion.
So justice isn't actually what we want.
No, if they receive grace, however, it is entirely at the Creator's discretion. There is a line of reasoning here that says, we have no rights when we come before the Almighty.
Zero rights.
If God chooses to save one person and not another, the one not saved is receiving the justice they earned. The one saved is receiving a grace they did not earn.
So no one is receiving injustice.
Precisely. Spurgeon argues that this doctrine of divine sovereignty is designed to humble people in the dust, to strip away every single ounce of human pride, rather than make them angry.
The anger only comes when we mistakenly believe we were owed something in the first place.
Spot on.
That makes me think of the analogy of the potter and the clay that he pulls from the Apostle Paul. I mean, the clay cannot look up at the potter and demand to be made into a fine vase instead of a common bowl.
It's just dirt.
Yeah, if I am a lump of dirt, I don't have constitutional rights in the hands of the artist shaping me. It is a hard pill to swallow, but it makes logical sense if you accept the premise of a creator and a creature.
That is the whole point. The potter has authority over the clay of the same lump to make one vessel for honor and another for a common use. The material itself is uniform.
We're all from the same lump.
Right. The difference in the final product comes entirely from the will and the hands of the potter. And if the householder in the parable has this absolute, unquestionable authority over who is hired, Spurgeon shows he also dictates the timeline of when they are hired.
Okay, so if the master gets to pick whoever he wants, whenever he wants, let's look at that timeline because it is wild.
It really is.
The workers are called at the early morning, then another group at the 3rd hour, the 6th, the 9th, and finally the 11th hour, which is right before the sun goes down.
Just minutes left in the workday.
Yeah, and this is where Spurgeon starts throwing punches at what he calls legal preachers. Apparently, in 1855, there were preachers who claimed that if a person is not saved by age 30, they likely never will be.
Yes, the past 30 myth. It was a prominent, terrifying tactic at the time. You have to remember, life expectancy was lower in the mid-19th century, but 30 was still quite young.
That's practically a kid.
Right. Preachers were using this arbitrary deadline to scare congregations, and Spurgeon systematically dismantles this idea. He highlights the vast, sweeping timeline of calling to show how absurd it is to put a biological clock on God.
Because the calling is all over the map.
It is. On one extreme, you have children learning from their mothers at a very young age. He references biblical figures like Timothy, who was taught the scriptures by his grandmother Lois and mother Eunice.
Or young Samuel.
Yeah, hearing the voice in the night while he was just a boy. But then on the other extreme, he brings up a really fascinating hypothetical scenario involving the wandering Jew.
Oh, right. The legendary figure who was cursed to walk the earth until the end of time because he supposedly mocked Christ on the way to the cross.
Yes, that old legend. Spurgeon says that even if such a person existed, and he was 2,000 years old, walking the earth for centuries, he could still find mercy if he trusted the Savior.
Wow. 2,000 years old.
The point of bringing up that extreme legend is to stretch the window of mercy to its absolute furthest limits. He is trying to say that chronological age is completely irrelevant to the householder's calling.
It's just kind of funny to think about a midlife crisis hitting at age 30. Like, oh no, I'm 31, my time for grace has expired. I guess I'll just buy a flashy horse-drawn carriage.
That's pretty much the sentiment they were dealing with.
But honestly, the quote he brings in from a hymn by Dr. Isaac Watts shows how serious this mindset was. The hymn goes, let me think. Life is the time to serve the Lord, the time to ensure the great reward. And while the lamp holds out to burn, the vilest sinner may return.
Classic Watts.
It sounds nice at first, but the logic underneath it implies you have to secure this while you have the energy and vitality of youth. People often act like the doors to the theater lock after the first act, and if you show up late, you are just stuck out in the cold.
Or that the ticket taker goes home.
Right. But Spurgeon is arguing the box office stays open until the curtain entirely falls on the stage of your life.
You can see why preachers might use that past 30 scare tactic, though. They likely did it with good intentions, wanting to stir up youth.
To get them off the couch?
Yeah, to create a sense of urgency so young people don't squander their prime years thinking they have all the time in the world. However, Spurgeon argues this tactic is catastrophic because it severely depresses the elderly.
It crushes their hope.
It makes a 60 or 70-year-old person think their hour of mercy has permanently passed, that they are too set in their ways or that God is no longer interested in them.
Like they missed their window.
But Spurgeon insists the Spirit blows where he pleases. Gray hair, failing eyesight, physical decay, being completely entrenched in bad habits, none of these are obstacles to the Creator's calling.
The absolute monarch is not restricted by the biological clock or the physical frailty of the creature.
Not at all.
Okay, so the master doesn't care when you show up. But that naturally begs the question, does he care how hard you work once you get there?
That is the big question of the parable.
Because if the timeline is that wide, how do you handle the compensation? This radically diverse timeline of hiring leads directly into a massive controversy in the story. Every single worker, whether they sweat under the hot sun for 12 grueling hours or just lightly prune some vines for 1 hour in the cool of the evening, receives identically 1 penny.
Just 1 penny.
That is it. 1 penny for everyone. And Spurgeon uses this to argue vehemently against a specific theological concept that was popular at the time, the idea of degrees of glory in heaven.
The rejection of degrees of glory is a central pillar of this whole message. Spurgeon breaks down the argument logically. The reward, represented by the penny, is not based on hours logged or sweat equity.
Which again offends our modern sensibilities.
Oh, completely. But think about the implications. A thief saved on a cross in his dying moments, a man who has lived a life of total crime and violence, sings as loud in heaven as the Apostle Paul, who suffered shipwrecks and beatings to plant churches across continents.
That is wild.
An unknown, bedridden, elderly woman who never did anything publicly recognized, who maybe only prayed quietly in her room, receives the exact same inheritance, the same penny, as a world-famous, celebrated minister. The logic of the earthly marketplace is completely inverted.
Wait, I have to push back on this because it sounds totally counterintuitive.
Right.
Even Spurgeon anticipates this, right? If I live a totally selfish life and repent on my deathbed, you are telling me my reward is the very same as someone who spent 50 years building orphanages and sacrificing everything. Doesn't the Bible itself say something about stars having different levels of brightness? People use that verse all the time to say, look, clearly there are tiers in heaven. The really good Christians get the bright stars, and the latecomers get the dim, barely visible stars.
It is a great question, and Spurgeon tackles it directly. He isolates that specific verse about the stars and clarifies that the Apostle Paul in that passage is talking about literal physical stars in the sky.
Oh, the actual astronomy.
Yes, the sidereal heavens, not the souls of human beings in eternity. He is using the physical heavens to explain the resurrection of the body, not to establish a tiered reward system for souls. But the core theological argument here goes much deeper than astronomical analogies. The argument is about justification.
Okay, we need to break that down. Justification can sound like seminary jargon. How do we explain that to someone who doesn't read theology textbooks for fun?
Sure, let's think of it like a financial ledger, or better yet, a credit score. Imagine you have a credit score of 0.
Yokes.
You are bankrupt, you have defaulted on every loan, and you cannot buy a piece of gum on credit. The law demands a perfect score of 850 to enter the kingdom. Justification is not God looking at your bankrupt account and saying, well, you tried your best, I'll let it slide.
So it's not grading on a curve.
No curve at all. Justification is someone with a perfect score. Christ stepping in and legally transferring his perfect score to your account. His righteousness is imputed or legally credited to you.
Oh, so it's like he co-signs the loan with his perfect credit, and God the Father looks at the account and only sees the perfect 850, not my string of bankruptcies.
Yes, and because of that, you cannot have fractions of Christ's righteousness. You cannot have 75% of perfection.
You either have it or you don't.
Right, you either have the perfect score entirely or you do not have it at all. Therefore, all believers are equally justified. They are all equally sanctified in the eyes of the law, and therefore they are all equally rewarded.
So there's no VIP section in heaven.
None. You cannot top up perfection into percentages. The glory of a believer is not their own accumulated good deeds. It is exclusively Christ's righteousness imputed to them.
That completely flips the script on how we view our own goodness. So the penny is not a wage. The penny is the complete righteousness of Christ.
Yeah.
And this it puts it in perspective.
It does. The answer is a resounding no. If he needed attendance, he could instantly create mighty kings and emperors to bow before him. He points out that the ocean hymning its deep praise in a solemn chorus does not make God any greater. He is independent of all of it.
And this is vital to understand, right?
It is, because it frames the nature of his mercy. He does not go into the marketplace because he is short-staffed or anxious about the harvest. He goes into the marketplace solely out of untiring, voluntary mercy.
To illustrate this, Spurgeon brings in an analogy about human adoption that honestly stings.
Yeah.
It is so convicting.
The adoption analogy is brutal.
It is. He asks the listener to imagine offering to adopt a poor, destitute young man off the street. You offer to wash him, clothe him, educate him, make him the heir to your estate. But he turns away.
He just rejects it.
Right, and he insults you to your face. He mocks your friends, breaks your rules, and thoroughly despises your generous offer. Then, when he is 40 or 50 years old, you find him and ask again.
And he refuses again.
Spits on your charity. Finally, when he is 70 or 80 years old, broken down, sick, having exhausted all the pleasures of his youth and completely ruined his life, he knocks on your front door and says, "Okay, I'll be your son now."
Wow.
A human being would slam the door. A human would say, "You vile ingrate, you just want a free almshouse now that you can't take care of yourself? Go back to the masters you served when you had strength."
And that human reaction makes perfect sense to us. Human charity is highly conditional. It is easily offended, and it naturally expects gratitude or some return on investment.
We want to feel appreciated.
For sure. If you insult human charity, it dries up immediately. But Spurgeon uses this to highlight the vast, unbridgeable chasm between human nature and divine mercy. God actively goes after those. Spurgeon bluntly calls the devil's hacks.
The devil's hacks. That is quite a phrase.
It is a 19th century term for an overworked, broken-down horse. He is talking about people who have worn themselves out in the service of sin. People who have literally nothing left to give, who are past labor and physically decrepit.
The one society throws away.
Right. God goes after the palsied man, the broken man, and says, "Come unto me." It is an unmerited pursuit of the entirely useless. It flies in the face of everything we know about how the world works.
Think about your own career or life achievements. How much of your identity is wrapped up in your resume of good deeds or your productivity or what you can offer to society?
Almost all of it, for most of us.
Yeah, this idea completely threatens that. It says your highest value is found when you realize you have nothing to offer. So we're looking at a paradox here. God is completely independent of creation, needing nothing, yet he actively, relentlessly pursues the most broken, worn-out members of it.
It's beautiful.
But because this astonishing mercy is available, Spurgeon then pivots. He turns from this beautiful picture of grace into a severe, agonizing warning for the older listeners in his audience who are still standing idle.
The pivot is sharp and intentional. He steps into his role as a preacher and issues a direct warning to the aged. He asks them to do the terrifying math of calculating their wasted years. 60, 70, 80 years gone.
That's a lot of math.
And the agonizing reality he presses on them is that they cannot buy back a single hour, not even with a king's ransom. Time has winged its way behind them, lost beyond the hope of rescue. It is a moment designed to induce deep regret, asking the listener to let scalding tears fall for the decades misspent.
The imagery used here is incredibly vivid. He leans on John Bunyan's metaphor, describing the aging body as the town of man's soul, shaking beneath the devastating engines of decay.
Yeah, the siege.
He talks about the battering ram of age. It is such a physical description. The senses are failing, the hearing is going, the windows are darkening, referring to the eyesight going dim, the town walls are tottering, death is laying siege to the city of the body, bringing up its siege towers.
And alongside the physical decay, there's the psychological and spiritual tragedy. He unpacks the horror of a person sitting through 104 sermons in a single year, attending 50 or 60 years of Sunday services, only to have the words run off them like oil from a slab of marble.
Think about the psychology of that.
It's terrifying. Thousands of sermons leaving them as dead as ever, myriads of warnings sinking into the sea like a hurled pebble. They have accumulated earthly wealth, perhaps, but they have survived physically while spiritually remaining utterly barren. The repetition of hearing truth and ignoring it has calcified their hearts.
That brings up a fascinating point. Why is a cold, calculated sin worse? Because Spurgeon mentions the horror of sinning when prudence has taken possession of thy soul.
Prudence being the key word there.
Yeah, we usually think of teenagers as the wild, sinful ones, while the elderly are just quiet and settled. Why does he view the sins of the elderly as heavier than the sins of the youth?
It comes down to the nature of rebellion. Youthful sin is often driven by raw passion, hormonal heat, and a sheer lack of life experience. It is volatile, impulsive, and sometimes blind.
Like they just don't know any better.
Right. But older sin is calculated, it is cold, it is deliberate. When the heat and ebullition of youth have died away, and prudence, reason, calculation, life experience has taken possession of the soul, to continue defying God in that state carries a much heavier weight of guilt.
Because it's a conscious choice at that point.
Exactly. I mean, yes, that's it, precisely.
Right.
You are no longer sinning because you are swept away by youthful lusts. You are sinning because you have logically, rationally decided to reject the Creator. You have seen the consequences of sin over decades. You have acquired wisdom, and yet you still choose rebellion. Defying God with prudence is presented as a far more chilling reality because it involves the full assent of the intellect.
That is heavy. It makes you realize that just aging out of bad habits doesn't make you righteous. It just makes you a more calculating rebel.
That's a great way to put it.
But while the aged are staring at the battering ram of decay and the consequences of their cold calculations, the youth are not let off the hook. Spurgeon makes sure of that.
No one is off the hook.
Young people listening might brush this off, smiling and saying, well, I am only 20. I am not at my 11th hour yet. I have plenty of time to figure this out later.
They think they have decades left.
He counters that entirely. He argues that anyone uncalled, regardless of their chronological age, is effectively standing idle at the 11th hour. Satan has no right to the first 20 years of a person's life.
The urgency is universal. He argues that the young person has already given too much time to serving the world. If you are unregenerate, you are living in the 11th hour because your life could end at any moment.
We don't get a guaranteed timeline.
No. A 20-year-old can be hit by a carriage just as easily as an 80-year-old can succumb to sickness. The present moment is the only hour you actually possess.
And this leads to what I think is the most gripping cinematic analogy in the entire message. It is designed to burn this urgency into the mind of the listener. I want to spend some time on this because it is so vivid.
The match analogy.
Yeah. Spurgeon walks the audience through the image of an old man lost in a freezing pine forest at night. Imagine the scene. The snow is falling thickly. It is pitch black, damp, and freezing cold. The howling of a wolf echoes in the distance.
So believe.
The man knows his body temperature is dropping. He will freeze to death or be consumed if he doesn't build a fire immediately. He frantically gathers pine wood and dry leaves. He takes out his matchbox. He counts them. He has exactly 70 matches.
And those 70 matches represent the lifespan, the years, the opportunities. Psalm 90 says the years of our life are 70.
Yes, the biblical lifespan. So he takes a match, strikes it against the box, but it is damp. Good for nothing. He tries another and another. Sometimes he gets a spark, it flares up for a second, he holds his freezing hand around it carefully, but a gust of wind blows it out.
The frustration would be unbearable.
Bitter, agonizing disappointment. He keeps striking them. Carelessly at first, thinking he has plenty, but as the box gets lighter, he becomes frantic. He strikes 69 of them, and every single one fails or is blown out.
Only one left.
Right. The wolves are getting closer. He can hear them snapping in the brush. The wind is whistling through the pines. His joints are completely frozen. He is down to his very last match. His benumbed, freezing fingers prepare to strike it.
The tension in the room when he preached this must have been palpable.
It's like a survival thriller, but for the soul. Spurgeon positions himself not as a harsh judge, but as a child trying to lead a blind old man out of the freezing forest, screaming at him to be careful with that last match.
The theology embedded in this match analogy is remarkable. It bridges the gap between divine sovereignty, which we talked about at the beginning, and human urgency.
Because they can seem contradictory, right?
For sure. A critic might ask, if God is an absolute monarch who calls whoever he wants whenever he wants, why should I care? Why should the preacher plead with me?
What's the point of the sermon?
Right. The man in the freezing forest might have burned through decades of warnings, Sunday school lessons, close calls with death, and quiet convictions. Those are the 69 failed matches. The present moment, hearing this specific plea, is the final match. On it depends his life. Spurgeon's intense emotional pleading, the sheer desperation in his voice urging the man to strike the match, is not a contradiction of the absolute monarch's sovereignty.
Yes, method.
Yes, that pleading is the mechanism through which the monarch calls the idle laborer. The decree of heaven is executed through the urgent warning of the preacher. When the final match flares up and the flame catches the dry leaves, it is the fire from above finally taking hold in the freezing soul. The preacher is simply the voice God uses to wake the dead.
O God, if thou dost not strike the 70th for him, he is lost forever. That is the cry of this message. He is begging God to make the match catch fire. So pulling all of this together, we are left with some incredibly striking concepts that completely upend how we normally think.
They turn our expectations upside down.
We see that human merit in the economy of grace is a total illusion. You are hired because the householder chooses to hire you, not because you polished your resume or worked harder than the next guy. We see that no one is too old, too vile, or too set in their ways to be called out of the marketplace.
Even the wandering Jew.
Yeah, the wandering Jew himself could find a harbor. We see that the compensation is perfectly equal, 1 penny for all, because the reward relies entirely on another's perfect credit score, not your own sweat. And finally, we see that whether you are 15 or 85, the time to strike the final match, the time to listen to the call is right now, today.
The entire message is a relentless dismantling of human pride and human procrastination. It strips away every excuse we use to delay, replacing those excuses with a terrifying view of God's absolute independence and a breathtaking view of his unmerited mercy.
It leaves you with nothing in your hands.
Which is precisely the posture required to receive a gift.
As we wrap up this look into Spurgeon's 1855 message, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, drawing on a specific, brief image he uses that is worth lingering on. He mentions the tragedy of a man putting all his earthly treasures into a bag full of holes. A bag full of holes. Think about your daily life right now, your career, your stress, your meticulous financial planning. How much of your energy is currently being poured into a bag full of holes? Building a legacy, gathering wealth, securing status, things that will inevitably drain away as the battering ram of age eventually hits your town of man's soul.
It all just drains right out.
Compare that exhausting, never-ending effort to simply accepting the equalizing penny offered to the idle laborers at the 11th hour. The storm is raging out there. The waves are high, the wind is freezing, and the boat is rocking. Maybe it is time to drop the anchor and finally find the harbor. Thank you for joining us on Reformed Thinking.